I smiled before I answered, because when your daughter calls, you never expect to hear the sentence that changes how you see your place in her life. I was standing at the kitchen counter, phone warm in my hand, already leaning toward her voice, already assuming this was about something good, something ordinary and happy, the way parents quietly hope without admitting it. She sounded normal at first. Careful. Polite. We talked about nothing important. Work. Traffic. The weather. I noticed how measured she was, how she never rushed a word, and I held my smile a little longer than I needed to, as if that might keep the moment light. Then there was a pause. Not long, but waited. The kind that presses instead of resting. My husband looked up from across the table, not because he heard her, but because he felt the change in me. And then she said it. Calm. Unembellished. You're not invited to the wedding. The words hovered before they landed. I stayed smiling, waiting for correction, for laughter, for the part where she took it back. I said her name softly, the way you do when you think someone misspoke. She didn't laugh. She continued. Explaining. Saying it was simply this way. Saying it was what she wanted. The details barely mattered anymore. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. My smile stayed longer than it should have. I tried to soften the moment, not because it was funny, but because mothers learn to dull the edge of things that shouldn't cut. I offered compromises. Quiet ones. Sitting in the back. Coming late. Leaving early. She stopped me. Gently. Completely. She said it wouldn't be appropriate. Appropriate. The word sat there. I felt heat rise behind my eyes and turned slightly away from the table because I didn't want my husband to see it yet. Once he felt it, I knew there would be no pretending left. I could sense him waiting anyway, still, patient, trusting me to speak when I could. She kept talking. I stopped listening. One memory pushed forward instead, sudden and sharp. Her at 7, standing on a school stage, shoulders tight, eyes scanning the crowd until she found us. The way her face changed when she did. As if being seen mattered more than the performance. My throat tightened. I said I understood, because that's what you say when you don't want to fracture something while you're still holding it. She said she hoped we weren't upset. I told her we were fine. The call ended quietly. No argument. No raised voices. Just a click. The screen went dark in my hand. I didn't move. Across the table, my husband didn't ask a single question. He watched me, eyes steady, waiting for permission to feel whatever this was. And in that silence, with the phone still in my hand and his gaze on my face, I realized we were standing at the edge of something we hadn't known was coming, and neither of us knew what would happen next. We sat in silence for a long moment. My husband poured himself a cup of tea, the steam curling up like a small comfort. I repeated her sentence in my mind. You're not invited to the wedding. Each time it landed harder. Each time sharper. I tried to convince myself it was a mistake. She must have meant something else. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe she would call back. I sipped my tea. My husband watched me, quiet, steady. I wondered if he felt the same sharpness in his chest. I wanted to laugh, nervously. Not at the words, just to lighten the weight. But the laugh caught in my throat. He finally looked at me. His eyes asked the question we didn't speak, does this really mean what it said? I shook my head, hoping denial could protect us a little longer. We spoke in fragments. Circling the truth without naming it. Did she hate us? No. Not hate. But she didn't want us there. That thought pressed down harder than the sentence itself. I remembered folding invitations. Choosing flowers. Smiling at the thought of her excitement. All that work and love, suddenly invisible. My husband's hand hovered over his cup. He didn't ask, but I felt his fear, his disbelief. We wanted to call her. Demand clarification. Argue. Cry. But we held back. We pretended. We spoke about errands. About the cat. Anything ordinary. But every word carried the weight of absence. I imagined her at the wedding, scanning the crowd. Our place empty. I told myself she would realize. She would call back. She would fix it. A small, sharp part of me whispered, maybe not. That whisper grew. We both felt it. A subtle tremor beneath our calm. I looked at him. He looked at me. We were holding each other up without touching. Holding on to denial. And yet, we knew. Somehow, we both knew. This was not the end. This was only the beginning. The next morning, the reason arrived, not in words we wanted, but in the quiet honesty of her voice over the phone. She said it casually, almost apologetically, like reading from a note she had practiced. Something about energy. About keeping the day small. About not wanting certain people around. I blinked. That was it. Just that. Nothing more. My mind spun. Energy? Small? Certain people? Not us. I looked at him. He stared at the wall, silent, as if the paint could absorb the shock for him. I wanted to laugh, not because it was funny, but to lighten the weight pressing down. The laugh got caught in my throat. I held the phone a little too tightly. I remembered her as a child, running into the kitchen with scraped knees, expecting bandages and comfort. Always assuming we would be there. And now, decades later, she had turned that expectation into absence. My throat tightened. I wanted to weep quietly, but he reached across the table. His hand brushed mine. Steady. Silent. I didn't need words to know he felt it too. We said nothing. Just held that quiet together. I pictured her wedding day. Music swelling. Guests laughing. And us nowhere to be seen. My chest hollowed at the thought. I tried to rationalize. Maybe she thought we would overstay. That was the strongest, simplest explanation I could hold on to. Nothing else mattered. I remembered the invitations we had hand-addressed. The flowers we had chosen in secret. The phone calls in the middle of the night, discussing color palettes and seating. Everything we had given, and she had decided it didn't belong. I turned away briefly, closing my eyes. A single tear traced my cheek. I didn't care if he saw. We spoke quietly, cautiously. What should we do? Go anyway? Sit quietly in the corner, watch strangers celebrate our daughter? Or step away entirely? Each question landed heavier than the last. Then it struck me, sharp and unavoidable. Had we been so eager to give that we never paused to see her world clearly? Had we assumed our love was enough, only to find it conditional? I looked at him. He nodded slowly. No words. We didn't need them. The plan that had filled months of evenings, weekends, and quiet sacrifices was suddenly unmade. The hurt wasn't only hers. It was ours too. We weren't angry. Not yet. Just raw. Aching. Hollow. And then, in the quiet that followed, we realized the choice would have to be made. We would either show up or step back. And neither of us knew if we could do it without shattering the last fragile pieces of hope we still carried. But we both sensed it, somehow, somewhere, the first move had already been made. And it was only the beginning. We spent that evening sitting across from each other, letting the quiet settle, but our minds refused to rest. Every corner of the house seemed to hum with reminders of what we had done for this wedding. The invitations we had hand-addressed. The tiny budget sacrifices, skipping dinners out, delaying trips we had longed for, just to make sure everything was perfect. Hours spent on color palettes. Seating arrangements. Making sure every detail reflected her joy. We had kept it all secret. Wanting nothing in return but her happiness. And now, she had decided we weren't part of it. I glanced at him. His hands rested on the table, jaw tight. He had carried these sacrifices too. Quietly. without acknowledgement, without expectation. I wanted to speak. To say we had poured ourselves into this. That every sleepless night, every careful decision, had been for her. But the words felt brittle. Instead, I let my chest tighten and looked at the photographs on the wall. Holidays. Birthdays. Small triumphs we had quietly celebrated together. I remembered moments no one else would know. How we had driven across the city late at night to help her friends with decorations she could never have managed alone. How we had cut back on our own comforts to make room for gifts, travel, surprises. All that effort, unseen. And now, dismissed in a single sentence. My husband finally spoke, quiet, measured. He said maybe she didn't realize. Maybe in her mind, it didn't exist. I shook my head. Not everything can be unseen and not leave a mark. We had existed in this wedding long before she made the list. We had shaped it. Carried it. And now we were cut out. A lump rose in my throat. I wanted to cry. But instead, I took a deep breath and imagined the wedding day. Guests arriving. Music swelling. Flowers in bloom. And us, nowhere. A hollowness spread across my chest. And yet, beneath the hurt, beneath the disbelief, there was something else. Pride. Pride in what we had done. In the love that had fueled it. Even if she couldn't see it. We sat together in the fading light, hands nearly touching, feeling the weight of everything unsaid, everything we had carried, and everything now denied. And in that quiet, the thought settled, the decision we would make next would not just be about a wedding. It would be about protecting that love. Protecting ourselves. Choosing dignity over presence. We could show up and be ignored. Or step away and keep our hearts whole. Either way, the consequences would ripple farther than anyone could guess. And somewhere deep down, we knew that tomorrow, we would have to choose, and that choice would change everything. That night, we moved through the house almost like shadows, each step careful, quiet, as if the walls themselves had learned to whisper and might overhear our grief. I sank into the armchair in the living room, hands resting in my lap. The silence pressed down, heavy and unrelenting. At first, I didn't cry. I just listened. The faint hum of the refrigerator. Distant traffic. My own heartbeat. Then it came. A sudden tremor in my chest I could no longer contain. I covered my face with my hands. The tears began. Slow at first, then spilling over, wet and warm. He didn't enter right away. I think he needed to make sure I had this moment alone. And when he did, he didn't speak. Didn't ask if I was okay. He just stood there. Waiting. Waiting for me to let him in. And I did, leaning against the armrest, letting him feel it too. Without words. Without explanation. We didn't touch. Not yet. The grief was too raw. Too precise. It needed space to stretch. To echo. I thought of her voice. Calm. Polite. So final. The sentence still sharp in my mind, "You're not invited to the wedding." Each repetition cut deeper. I thought of all the mornings we had woken early to help her. All the nights we stayed late making plans. All the little sacrifices that had gone unnoticed. And now, suddenly, erased. I felt small, diminished, as if those months of effort had never existed. Yet the love behind them throbbed in my chest. Stubborn. Unyielding. Refusing to vanish. He whispered then, barely audible, "What do we do now?" I had no answer. Only the ache. The hollow space where anticipation should have lived. I pressed my palms into my eyes again. The tears kept coming. Each carried memory. Regret. Hope. Frustration. Disbelief. And yet, in the midst of it all, there was a quiet recognition. This was ours to own. Ours to feel fully. Without pretending. No one else would know the depth of what had been given. What had been lost. what now hovered between us like a shadow waiting to take form. We breathed together. Slowly. Matching rhythm. Until the tremor softened into a dull ache. Then I imagined her wedding again. The music would rise. Guests would smile. Flowers would bloom. And we, nowhere in the scene. The thought hollowed my chest, but it also sharpened clarity. We would have to make a choice soon. Go or step away. Participate or protect ourselves. The grief had to settle first. Felt in its entirety before we could act. And as we sat there, hands near but not touching, night deepening around us, I realized something frightening and true. We could not pretend this hadn't happened. We could not ignore it. And neither of us knew if the choice we would make tomorrow would heal us, or break us further. But we knew, somehow, that tomorrow's choice would define everything after this night. Morning came quietly, the sun spilling pale light across the kitchen table, painting everything in fragile gold. I sat there, coffee untouched, staring at the cup, listening to the house breathe. He sat opposite me, hands folded, jaw tight, eyes tracing the edges of the table as if the wood could give guidance. We didn't speak at first. The silence between us was heavier than words. Then I whispered it, maybe we shouldn't go. He didn't react immediately. Didn't argue. Just waited. And in that waiting, a strange weight lifted. We had carried the decision for days, and now it was ours to claim. No one else could choose for us. I took a deep breath and imagined the day. Music swelling. Guests laughing. Flowers bright, colors dancing in the light. And us absent. I imagined her laughing with friends, sharing moments we would never witness, our absence quietly folding into the joy we had helped create. The thought was sharp. Painful. But also freeing. I looked at him. He nodded slowly. No words. That nod held everything we needed to know. Quietly, we began to move. Softly. Almost reverently. Packing a small bag. Folding jackets. Checking the calendar. Quiet clicks, small sounds. I paused at the doorway, hand resting on the frame, and looked back. Each photo, each memory, each tiny token of effort whispered farewell. I swallowed hard. My throat felt raw. He touched my shoulder briefly, grounding me, reminding me we were in this together. We moved down the steps. Each footstep careful. Quiet. Neither of us spoke, yet the air was thick with emotion. I imagined her arriving, the crowd gathering, the excitement building, and us missing it all. The thought stung, but the sting was tempered with clarity. This day would not define the limits of our love. Exclusion would not diminish us. Outside, the morning air was crisp, sharp against our faces. The car waited silently, a vessel for our escape and resolve. I opened the door, and the first deep breath hit me, cold, steady, real. He followed, locking the door behind us, the finality pressing against our shoulders. The neighborhood was quiet, unaware of the invisible rupture we carried. We slid into the car. The engine hummed softly. I glanced at him. He glanced back. No words needed. The choice was made. Every nerve in my body ached for the parting we had lost, the absence that would echo through the day. But the act of leaving wasn't just about a wedding. It was about reclaiming ourselves. About standing in the world with hearts still whole, despite the ache. And somewhere deep in that quiet drive, I understood that this departure, silent and resolute, was only the first ripple. The consequences were waiting. And tomorrow, when the world moved forward without us in that hall, we would discover just how far the echoes of this day would reach, and we knew, somehow, that tomorrow's choice would define everything after this morning. The drive was quiet at first, the hum of the engine filling spaces words couldn't reach. I gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly, knuckles pale, each turn and stop feeling heavier than usual. He sat beside me, eyes fixed on the road, though I knew he wasn't seeing it, his mind was elsewhere, tracking memories and moments that neither of us could untangle yet. I stole glances at him, the way his jaw tensed, the subtle shift of his shoulders, and realized how deeply he carried this too. We hadn't spoken since leaving the house. There was nothing to say. The grief had to move with us. It had to settle somewhere in the space between the windshield and the rearview mirror. And yet, it kept surfacing, uninvited. I remembered her at 10, practicing a dance recital in the living room, eyes shining when we clapped and cheered. I remembered folding laundry late at night, listening to her laughter from the kitchen, knowing we were the invisible audience cheering the loudest. And now, she had chosen to erase us from the day we had helped shape. My throat tightened. I swallowed, hard, tasting the silence that seemed to stretch forever. He finally spoke, quiet, careful, almost more to himself than me. "Do you think she'll notice we're gone?" The question landed differently than I expected. It wasn't about anger. It wasn't about resentment. It was a quiet, piercing ache, hope mixed with disbelief, wondering if all we had given had been truly seen at all. I shook my head slightly, because no answer could fill that space. And then the memories flooded, sharper this time. Her birthday 5 years ago, the cake she insisted we bake together. How she had hugged us afterward, and I had felt a pulse of something enduring, something I thought would last forever. And yet, here we were, silent passengers in a car moving farther away from a day we had lived in our minds for months. I imagined the guests arriving, friends greeting each other, the laughter rising, the flowers glowing in the sun. And us, nowhere. Not watching. Not guiding. Not part of the joy we had carried into it. A tight, almost physical ache pressed against my chest. I leaned back, eyes closing briefly, and he exhaled beside me, a soft, trembling sound, confirming that he felt it too, that this wasn't mine alone to bear. And in that quiet, I realized, grief isn't just what you feel in the room left behind. It rides with you, wraps around you, echoes in every turn of the wheel, in every red light, in every moment your mind tries to justify, to rationalize, to hold on to a fragment of what once was. I thought of the wedding invitations we had addressed together, the hours we had spent planning details, the small, quiet sacrifices no one would ever know. And I felt both the sting of erasure and a strange, stubborn pride. We had given fully. Even if she could not see it. We didn't speak again until we passed the old park where she had learned to ride her bike, her laughter ringing from decades past. I tightened my grip. He reached over, brushing my hand briefly. No words. Only presence. Only acknowledgement that we were in this together, carrying everything silently. And somewhere deep in that quiet drive, I understood something terrifying and true. Leaving wasn't just about absence. It was about protecting ourselves from being invisible in a life we had spent shaping, a life that suddenly told us we did not belong. The car rolled on. The road stretched ahead, empty and waiting, and we knew, somehow, that every mile, every moment of this drive, was changing us, and that nothing after today would ever feel the same again. We pulled up to the small cafe on the outskirts of town, the kind of place with quiet corners and chipped tables that seemed to hold their own history of whispered conversations and unseen moments. Neither of us spoke as we stepped out, the morning air crisp, biting lightly at our cheeks. I locked the car behind us, feeling the weight of the choice we had made settle fully on our shoulders. Inside, the cafe smelled of coffee and bread, warm and grounding, a stark contrast to the tension still clinging to our skin. We chose a booth by the window, not facing anyone, not needing to be noticed. I watched him carefully, the lines of exhaustion and grief etched into his face, and felt the same reflection mirrored in my own expression. Every step we had taken to leave the wedding behind now felt heavier, more permanent. We hadn't argued, hadn't debated. The decision had been silent, mutual, yet its consequences hummed between us, sharp and insistent. I sipped my coffee, tasting the warmth, letting it remind me of ordinary things still within reach. And then the memories came again, unbidden, cutting through the quiet. Her voice calling from the top of the stairs, the excited chaos of birthdays we had meticulously planned, the small moments of pride when she mastered something new, and how we had always been there, quietly cheering, silently guiding, loving without demand. And now, she had drawn a line, and we were not meant to cross it. I felt a hollow ache, a twisting of hope into disbelief. He reached for my hand across the table, a brief touch, grounding me. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The connection was enough. And yet, in that small, neutral space, the question pressed itself on us: what would happen when she realized we weren't there? Would she feel absence? Or would our love remain invisible, just as it had seemed in that phone call, in that single sentence that reshaped everything? I closed my eyes briefly, imagining her walking into the hall, laughter spilling into the air, friends greeting each other, the music swelling, flowers glowing, and us, gone. Not hidden. Not ignored. Simply absent. The image cut sharp, and I realized the sting wasn't just about missing a day. It was about being unseen in a life we had nurtured. We had poured ourselves into the details, the plans, the sacrifices no one else noticed, and now we carried the weight of it quietly, like a shadow stitched into our chest. I exhaled, a long, slow breath, and he mirrored it. Our hands parted slightly, yet the air between us carried understanding. This was not over. Not yet. We would have to confront, in some way, the reality that she had excluded us. That absence had become deliberate. And even as we sipped our coffee, letting the warmth seep in, I knew the next move mattered. It wasn't just about a day. It was about standing in the truth of what we had given, what had been denied, and what we still needed to claim for ourselves. Outside, the street hummed softly with life, unaware of the storm we carried. And in that quiet corner, we realized, this wasn't just waiting. This was preparing. Preparing for what had to be said, for what might never be forgiven, and for the moment when our love, silent and steadfast, would demand recognition. And we knew, somehow, that what happened next would change everything. We left the cafe reluctantly. The warmth inside replaced by the brisk reality of the street. Our footsteps were sharp against the pavement, marking the path we couldn't take back. He fell into step beside me. Silence stretched between us, heavy, yet full of understanding. We knew what had to be done. See her. Speak. Even if it hurt more than we could bear. As we approached her neighborhood, the air thickened. The familiar streets felt charged with the tension of exclusion. I imagined her inside. Laughing with friends. Carefree joy we had once shared. Now beyond reach. Our hands brushed briefly, a reminder. We faced this together. Hearts beating in sync with fear and love. We rang the doorbell. My stomach twisted. My mind replayed decades of small moments, scraped knees, late-night calls, whispered encouragements, countless times we had put her happiness before our own. All that history hovered between us and the door, invisible yet impossible to ignore. She opened it. Surprise flickered in her eyes, quickly masked by a polite smile. Tension coiled in my chest. The ache of being unseen mixed with new heat, anger, confusion, heartbreak. He stepped forward first. Words formed in his mind. When he spoke, they came softer than expected. We came because we needed to understand. I said nothing, letting him carry the weight. Though my heart screamed every word I couldn't find. She faltered. The smile slipped. Eyes widened. I watched her, looking for traces of regret, apology, anything to explain a sentence that had rewritten our reality. A fleeting pause. All the years, all the love, all the sacrifices hung between us like fragile glass. I remembered our home. The laughter. The quiet moments no one else knew. The ache deepened. She opened her mouth. I saw hesitation. Uncertainty. The first hint that perhaps she had not realized the depth of what she had done. My chest tightened. Every breath felt heavy. I wanted to cry. To scream. To pull her into the memory of what we had shared. Instead, I held myself steady. Let the quiet speak volumes. He reached out. Lightly touched my hand. Grounded me. Reminded me I wasn't alone. The question pressed, could love bridge the absence? Could decades of care and sacrifice be acknowledged in a single, fragile conversation? And there it was, the tension. Sharp. Raw. In that quiet, precarious moment, I realized this confrontation wasn't about blame. It was about reclaiming our place, not for a day, not for a wedding, but for all the years we had lived, loved, and quietly given. It was about being seen. Finally. Fully. Before the moment passed. The morning light fell across the doorway. Her hesitation lingered. But in it, I sensed something fragile and real. Something that might bridge the absence. We stepped inside quietly. The familiar scent of home hit me like a memory I hadn't realized I was holding on to. The floors creaked under our careful steps, each sound amplified by the tension that wrapped around us like a thin, sharp veil. I glanced at him. His shoulders were tight, his hands clenched slightly at his sides. Yet the steadiness in his eyes told me he had made the same choice I had, to face this moment fully, without flinching. She watched us. Her hands rested lightly on the counter. The polite smile was still there, trembling almost imperceptibly at the edges. I felt the old ache rise again, the ache of being unseen, of loving quietly and being ignored, but it was tempered now by the resolve that had carried us here. We didn't sit immediately. We lingered near the doorway, letting the air settle, letting her presence and ours meet without collision, a delicate negotiation of space and emotion. I thought of every birthday, every late-night conversation, every quiet gesture we had made that had gone unnoticed. Suddenly those memories felt alive, tangible, pushing me forward rather than holding me back. He finally spoke, softly, measured. We needed to be here. We needed to see you. To understand. I let my voice join his, calm but firm. And to be seen. Her eyes flickered between us. Hesitation. Confusion. Maybe even guilt. Small, fleeting, human. I stepped closer, carefully, letting the weight of decades of love, effort, and silent devotion speak for me. The room seemed to hold its breath. She swallowed, glanced away, then back, as if searching for a way to repair something she hadn't fully realized was broken. The tension was thick, almost tangible, pressing against every nerve. Yet beneath it, I felt something new, a quiet acknowledgement, a subtle shift in her stance, the smallest opening. We didn't demand it. We simply allowed our presence to exist, letting the history of our love fill the space, undeniable and strong. I noticed the small signs, the twitch of her hands, the straightening of the counter edge, her eyes lingering on the photographs lining the walls, the snapshots of her childhood, the milestones we had celebrated, the invisible work of parents who had always given without pause. The ache softened, replaced by a fragile hope. We were still standing. Still here. Still part of the story, even if only by memory and presence. He touched my hand lightly, grounding me. I returned the gesture, letting it anchor the resolve we carried together. Then she spoke. Quiet at first, hesitant, yet unmistakably real. I didn't realize. The sentence trembled, unpolished, human. In it, I heard the possibility of repair. The room felt lighter, as if the house itself had exhaled. I let my own breath out slowly, steadying, feeling the truth of what we had done and the courage it had taken to arrive here. We weren't visitors. We weren't intruders. We were the parents who had loved fully, silently, unwaveringly. And for the first time since that phone call, I felt it, the possibility that absence could be bridged, that love could be acknowledged, that years of devotion might finally be seen. The morning light streamed through the windows, catching dust motes in its glow. The tension lingered, fragile. But in it, I sensed something real. Something that might last. Something that might heal, if only we let it. The house felt different now, not because anything had changed, but because we had. Our presence alone seemed to shift the air, subtle but undeniable, like the first breeze before a storm breaks, carrying possibility and tension together. She stood across from us, still unsure, still hesitant, yet more open than when the door first opened. I watched her fingers twist lightly, restless, searching for courage, or perhaps a way to mend the invisible fractures that had formed. I felt the same ache I had carried since that phone call, but now it was tempered by patience and quiet determination. We had come to witness, to be seen, and to let the conversation, no matter how imperfect, begin. He stepped slightly forward, and I mirrored him, letting our bodies signal unity, strength, and love that had always been present, though unnoticed. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of life around us, the faint tick of the clock, the whisper of wind through the open window. And then the first words came, halting, vulnerable. I didn't understand what it meant to leave you out, she said, voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying more weight than any shouted apology could. My chest tightened, a mix of relief, sorrow, and lingering disbelief. I didn't answer immediately. I let the words settle, letting them find space in the room, in our hearts. Then he spoke, steady, calm, full of the love that had carried us here. We needed you to see that what we gave, it was never invisible. It's always been here. I nodded, letting the affirmation carry me, grounding me in truth. She looked at us then, fully, eyes wide and glimmering with something fragile and real. The tension that had gripped the room began to ease, shifting imperceptibly like water finding its level. Memories rose unbidden, her first steps, the nights we stayed up comforting her, the birthdays, the laughter, the tears we had shared silently together, and I realized that those years, though never perfectly acknowledged, had built a bridge stronger than any argument, stronger than absence. She inhaled, a long, trembling breath. For the first time since that phone call, I felt her truly seeing us. Not as intruders, not as critics, not as shadows from the past, but as the parents who had loved her fully, unconditionally, in ways she hadn't measured, yet who had never stopped giving. I reached out slowly. She mirrored the gesture, hands hovering before finally resting lightly against ours. The contact was small, but in it lay decades of connection, quiet acknowledgement, and tentative reconciliation. He exhaled softly, almost unnoticeable, and I felt the tension melt further, replaced by a fragile hope that had been impossible earlier. The morning light streamed through the windows, golden and forgiving, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny witnesses to this reunion. I felt the full weight of relief and love, grief softened by recognition, and knew that while the past could not be erased, it could be honored, acknowledged, and woven back into our story. In that fragile, golden moment, I understood, love, even when tested, ignored, or denied, could find a way to be recognized, to be felt, to exist fully once more, if only we were brave enough to be present, fully, patiently, without expectation. The day passed slowly after that fragile acknowledgement, the house quiet but alive with a new kind of presence, our presence, fully claimed, without pretense, without apology. I sat in the living room, letting the sunlight spill across the floor, tracing patterns that seemed ordinary, yet now carried weight, as if every shadow and beam had watched the day unfold alongside us. He moved beside me, quietly folding a blanket, the small, mundane motions grounding both of us in the reality we had chosen to face. We hadn't spoken much, not because we had nothing to say, but because the silence itself was meaningful. A conversation built of shared glances, subtle gestures, and the unspoken understanding of a love that had endured the sharp edges of exclusion. I thought of her, moving through the house in fits of nervous energy, tidying, adjusting, laughing quietly to herself, as if testing whether our presence had changed something. And it had. We were still part of the story, woven into the tapestry of her life, not erased, not invisible, even when she hadn't known how to acknowledge it. I remembered all the moments that had brought us here, birthdays, school projects, scraped knees, late-night consoling, whispered encouragements in the dark. I felt both sorrow and pride, grief tempered by recognition. We had been unseen, yes, but never absent in the ways that mattered most. We had loved fully, and that love was now palpable, tangible, stretching across the room, settling in every small gesture she made, in every tentative word of apology, in every careful step she took toward understanding. We shared small smiles, glances filled with quiet triumph and lingering sadness, the mixture of joy and sorrow that comes from surviving something painful yet meaningful. The air seemed lighter, as if the house itself had exhaled, releasing the tension that had wrapped around us like a second skin. Though the wedding day still loomed, with music, flowers, guests, and celebration that would not include us, I realized that the absence we had feared was now filled with something stronger: recognition, acknowledgement, and the slow, steady reclamation of our place in her life. We didn't need grand gestures or shouted declarations. Presence was enough. Connection was enough. The room hummed softly with life, the tick of the clock, the rustle of curtains in the breeze, the distant murmur of neighbors, ordinary sounds now carrying extraordinary significance. And in those ordinary moments, I felt the extraordinary truth settle inside me: love, even when ignored, even when unacknowledged, can endure, survive, and finally be seen when hearts are ready to recognize it. He reached out lightly, our fingers brushed, a quiet affirmation that we had faced it together, survived the absence, and reclaimed something vital, something permanent. She looked at us again, eyes glimmering with tentative understanding, a fragile bridge forming between past hurt and future hope. And I realized, fully, that this story, the heartbreak, the exclusion, the grief, the silent decision to leave, and the tentative return, wasn't about one day, one wedding, one phone call. It was about the endurance of love, the courage to stand in it, the bravery to be present fully, and the profound impact of simply being seen. The sunlight shifted, golden and forgiving, illuminating dust motes that danced like witnesses to this fragile reconciliation. In that moment, I felt a deep, quiet peace, knowing that though the wedding would come and go, though absence would always be a part of the story, we had reclaimed our place, fully, finally. Our love, silent, unwavering, and resilient, would continue to shape the story in ways both subtle and profound, for the rest of our days.